Hey LinkedIn, I wanted to talk to you about imposter syndrome today. As someone who's experienced it and experienced it while applying to internships, clerkships, and grad roles, I thought I'd share my experiences, what I'd learned from it, and some steps that you can take to help you deal with it, in the hopes of helping others who may be feeling the way that I did. Now, starting with my experiences, some ways that imposter syndrome has affected me personally have occurred when I've been applying for jobs. I've either not submitted applications or withdrawn from them for fear of being discovered as incompetent. I've made it to the interview stage of jobs and have then either skipped on the interview or been simply too nervous to even talk because of a fear that the interviewer would then discover how incompetent I was if they heard me talk. Another instance that was quite notable was when I was invited to a law firm's cocktail evening and have either hidden in the bathroom or pretended to be on my phone because after speaking to a couple of the other applicants, I felt so inferior that people would all realize how incompetent I was if I started speaking. Now, all of these things have negatively impacted me and may be relevant to you, but keep in mind that imposter syndrome affects us all differently. It might manifest in different ways for you, but the underlying thing we're looking at is this feeling of inadequacy or intellectual fraudulence, feeling like you don't belong somewhere, and therefore this leads to feelings of anxiety and fear that you'll be discovered somehow by people who are looking to trip you up and find out how incompetent you are. We're also seeing that most people experiencing these sorts of feelings have clear achievements which prove otherwise. So, how do we deal with imposter syndrome? A while ago, I watched a TED Talk by Dr. Valerie Young, an expert on imposter syndrome. And this talk really helped me start my journey with dealing with imposter syndrome. I'll put the link in the comments and the post, and I recommend that everyone have a watch of the video. It's only 6 minutes long, so it'll be well worth your while. One of the key takeaways from that talk provides us with our starting point for dealing with imposter syndrome. In order to stop feeling like an imposter, you need to first stop thinking like one. So how do we stop thinking like an imposter? There are two ways that I want to recommend today, and the first technique is one that has been suggested by Dr. Young in that very same talk, and it's called reframing. Reframing is simply taking these negative thoughts of you being an imposter and reframing them in a positive way where you aren't an imposter. The example that Dr. Young uses is about a person who pulls together a useful presentation for a large crowd and is given positive feedback about it. When she thinks like an imposter, she focuses on the fact that she somehow managed to deceive this whole crowd into thinking whatever rubbish she came up with was useful. And therefore, she's scared that they're going to figure it out. They're going to figure out that whatever she's talking about actually isn't useful and it's rubbish. When she's not thinking like an imposter, though, what she focuses in on is the fact that she needs to be highly competent at what she's doing in order to pull together useful information in such a short amount of time and have people actually find value in it. This is something that I've had to use recently, in fact, when I clerked at Ashurst over the summer. Before we started the clerkship, we were sent a list of the names of all the clerks that were coming in, and I thought I'd look at a few of them up on LinkedIn to see who I would be working with. And I found that many of them had intern experience at a Big Four auditing firm. Others have had years, 2 to 3 years of paralegaling experience in other law firms, and a couple of them even had experience as a congressional intern for a US senator. And so immediately I felt like an imposter. It sounds really dumb when I say it aloud now, but I was convinced that HR had made some sort of mistake, that they meant to have made the offer to someone else, or that I'd somehow miraculously tricked both the HR managers and the partners that I'd interviewed with across 2 rounds of interviews. And it took me a while to sort of get out of this mindset. But when I started to reframe this and I started thinking about Dr. Young's talk, I realized that instead of questioning how I got there, I could reframe by thinking that I must have shown the value of my experiences and my potential as a person during my interview and application in order to join such a cohort of clerks who had such extraordinary experiences under their belt. I was joining an elite group of people who had done great things, so I must have done something well. Another technique I use to help me reframe is to simply label the emotion. Labeling is simply observing and naming the emotion that you're feeling. And in a landmark 2007 psychological science study, scientists actually found that simply naming and labeling an emotion was able to reduce its negative impacts. So what I did was simply to acknowledge that I was experiencing imposter syndrome, that I was feeling these feelings. And I don't know what the exact science behind it is, but this helped me acknowledge what I was dealing with and put me in the right mind frame to then tackle it. I knew what I was dealing with and I knew what sort of techniques I could apply to then reduce it, and this helped me. The second broad thing you can do to change your mindset is to stop setting unfair and unrealistic standards for yourself. When that little voice in your head tells you that you're a fraud or you're an imposter, often what it's also doing is it's applying really ridiculous standards for you to fail from. So, for example, I once found myself spiraling at a networking event because another applicant had mentioned a recent case to a lawyer at the firm, and I had no idea what it was. I had never heard of it. And looking at it with hindsight, I can obviously see now that it's a little ridiculous to expect a law student not working in a certain area to know every single new development that had occurred in that area. So what's important is to remind yourself that you don't need to meet every single bar that is out there. You don't need to satisfy every single criteria to the perfect extent. So that means you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be good at everything. And you don't need to never make a mistake. All of these things are normal, and all of these things are things that people do regularly. And for the people applying to clerkships next month, remember that you don't need to be an expert in any area of law. You don't need to try and demonstrate that you know every deal happening to get a clerkship and rotate through mergers and acquisitions. You don't need to be across every single transaction a firm has ever been on, or in every case that they've acted on. And more generally, you don't need perfect marks or perfect anything to get a clerkship. People understand that you're students and that you have lives, and they look at you holistically. That's all from me today, and once again, I want to hear from my network. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like an imposter, and how did you manage? How do you manage these feelings, and what are your best tips for doing that? Thanks for watching, and see you next time.